With that being said, let's jump on into this study on witchcraft, Wicca, paganism, which I've noticed is one of the most, it's become one of the most popular religions and fastest growing religions that I've seen in my own social circles. It's quite common nowadays to be talking with someone and find that they're kind of a spiritual person, and when you push a little deeper, that they're a Wiccan, a pagan, a witch. What's funny is that there seems to be it seems to be quite a personal religion. I've been talking to a few different people of these practices, and it seems like Wicca is a well-defined practice, but within the practitioners of Wicca, between the different covens and the different followings that are out there, they can express themselves in different ways, much like we see in Christianity with the different denominations that are out there. Even within a evangelical free church as a denomination, not one is going to be the same as necessarily the other. You can see quite variation in there. What's interesting is that some of the people I talked to, they said witch is not a good term to define them, or Wiccan. They said that they would prefer to be called pagan, taking that from the people I listen to and going and talking to other people. I've offended witches and Wiccans by calling them pagan. And they said that that's an offensive term. So some prefer to be called pagans, some don't. Is there a difference between Wicca, witchcraft, and paganism? And what I've come to find is that it seems to be a very personal expression of faith, a very personal expression of a belief system. It seems that not any given person is the same. And so where you might be able to find a prominent leader within the community, even followers under that prominent leader might have a different expression or different deities. So what I want to do tonight is, one thing I want to avoid is being the source of authority on a belief system that is not mine, right? That's where we can get in trouble. And a lot of times where I check out other apologetics podcasts and things like that, you have people who aren't followers of or practitioners of the religion teaching on the religion, and they can be very smart, they can be very well studied, very well versed, but then when you go and talk to the actual practitioners, say, did this guy get you right? They could say, no, not exactly. And so when you don't have true belief in something, you can kind of mislead people or so a lot of my experience today is going to be drawn in actual conversations I've had practically with people on the street, at the bar, at the coffee shop, just in day-to-day life. That being said, I'm going to have quite a few of those people that I've spoken with on for interviews. And I think it's important to have more than just one, again, because of the different expressions of the worldview, the faith, the practices of these three: Wicca, witchcraft, and paganism. That being said, I thought we'd just start with a little bit of an introduction to what I've seen, what I've talked to people about, and contextualizing a little bit for someone who comes from outside of this practice or these practices. And give you kind of my take, my journey through this. And so, first of all, I think what's surprising to some people, though maybe it shouldn't be, is that Wicca, witchcraft, paganism, we're going to see tonight that they're three distinct things. So I'll reference all of them. Witchcraft is, though, probably a good broad term, and in the videos and people I've talked to, that doesn't seem to be an offensive thing to say. But what's interesting about this practice is that it's actually very close to the Christian worldview when it comes to a lot of the takes that we have on spirits and demonology. Now, that being said, it is radically different. But it's interesting when talking with a Wiccan or witch or pagan that I will say, oh, that's interesting, I believe the same thing. Oh, that's interesting, I believe the same thing. Oh, that's interesting, I believe the same thing. Within the Bible, both Old Testament and New Testament, there are many examples of famous pagans and witches and sorcerers, and you have there's one named Simon, who is a tagger on of some of the early apostles in the early church, and he sees the apostles working miracles, and he wants to get some of this power. He wants to see what's going on with this other power that these apostles are using. There's Bar Jesus, also known as Elymas or Elymas. I could be mispronouncing that wrong, and he's another prominent spellcaster, sorcerer, worker of witchcraft. You've got in Acts 16 a girl who can tell the future, and she's making some people money by doing this. You have in the Old Testament, you have Pharaoh's magicians, which are copying the miracles of Moses until they reach a point where they say, "This is the hand of God. We can't do that." There's the Witch of Endor, who's an interesting character we'll take a look at in a second. Where she's conjuring up spirits, and she says, "I see many Elohim rising up from the earth, many little gods rising up from the earth." We're going to see in Wicca, and we'll get into this in a moment, or within witchcraft, that there is a prime reliance for part of it, within 2/3 of the expression we're going to see tonight, on deities. Though there is secular witchcraft that doesn't involve or invoke necessarily deities and spirits. It's more of an energy-based manipulation thing. And I'd be very interested to get into Eastern philosophy and see how the energy of witchcraft crosses over with the energy of Taoism, Taoism, and other Eastern philosophies, Eastern religions. That being said, let's take a look. So tonight we're going to be looking at a YouTube channel. And we're going to be looking at the witch's Cookery, and she's going to have on two other prominent witches within the community that are going to they're going to explain to us this their takes on it. That being said, we're not going to watch the whole thing. It's quite a long video. I do recommend you guys go and support this channel and watch the whole video yourself as well, just to get the full thing in context. Tonight, we want to study, we want to learn. So that being said, let's jump on into this and see what she has to tell us today as she introduces us to the others.
Hi lovelies, and welcome to the Witch's Cookery. My name is Bex, and I've been a practicing kitchen and cottage witch for 18 years. And today I have something very special planned for you, because I have two guests with me. The wonderful Scarlett Ravenwoods, that has a YouTube channel about paganism, neo-paganism, where she explains different kind of cultures and dives deep into pagan beliefs, pagan worship. She also makes videos on the different pagan holidays. So in general, if you're interested in that path, that's a really, really good resource to check out. And my other guest for today is Ella Harrison, who also has a YouTube channel on the Wiccan faith, the Wiccan belief. She is a practicing Wiccan, and today she will share her point of view and beliefs with you. So if you're familiar with my channel, you might have gathered that I'm a secular and agnostic witch, which means that I don't practice witchcraft as part of a religious faith or lifestyle. I also don't dive too deep into the woo-woo aspect of it. So I thought it would be a fun idea to have three people from three different backgrounds talk about their pagan beliefs, their Wiccan faith, the differences that lay in all those paths, and of course also the things that we all have in common. So if you have asked yourself questions like, what is paganism, or how do
So right away, just to recap, one thing that I mentioned before is here there are three different expressions. And I think it's important to note, again, even among the people that I've talked to, these three will not be the three categories or the only three categories, right? You shouldn't be like, every time you meet a Wiccan or a witch or a pagan, be like, which one are you? I heard these three people talk. So now I know everything about each three of them. Every expression of this belief that I found has been extremely diverse and unique, but that's why getting three different takes on it will help give us a good ballpark average for the core tenets that they should all generally agree on. So that being said, let's continue going.
Wiccans practice witchcraft, or what is actually atheist or agnostic witchcraft, then this is the video for you. grab yourself a cup of something, get a nice slice of cake because we will be here for a minute, and then we'll dive right into the witchy chat.
What is Wicca to you?
Oh gosh. Okay, so Wicca to me is just a very nature-focused religion. It's definitely a religion in believing. For me, I always work with the goddess, and I've actually recently started working also more with the god figure. For me, I do appreciate the more traditional Gardnerian kind of path, let's say, and
so this is something that I want to also note, that in my conversations with Wiccans and other people of spiritual beliefs that fall under this, there seems to be a core, and they're not going to explain who the goddess or the god are, but there seems to be a core belief, shared amongst them, that there are levels of deities, and the highest level of deity is the goddess and the god. It's a masculine, feminine, ultimate being who kind of falls under the rest. They'll get into kind of an expression of what that looks like for the lesser deities here in a moment, but I think it's important to note that that's kind of, and some don't even, I've seen some not even believe in the god, just specifically the goddess. So there's a duality of gods there, and then in the singularity of gods, if it's or the god of just the goddess, there seems to be three manifestations. One's the crone, one's the matron, and I forget the third one. But again, I'm not an expert on this. I'm going to have some experts on, or some practitioners on, so we can get better information from them. But tonight we're just diving into the preliminary study here. But I just want to point out that, So here she's hinting at, she's working with the goddess and sometimes the god. So she's going straight to the highest deity, whereas the pagan's gonna the pagan practitioner here, she's gonna get into some other deities. Let's keep going.
And that's kind of how I was raised, or how I learned it. And now I work mainly with like energies and stuff like that within that context. And nature is a really big part in my path. And the ceremonial aspect that is within Wicca, of course, is also, so for example, my altar, I have a very somewhat traditional Wiccan altar with that theme, and like the setup being feminine and masculine. And then I, in my personal path outside of Wicca, that where it kind of is eclectic, let's say, I liked to kind of add a little bit of things like crystal magic, or what else, like kitchen element or hearth magic, let's say. Also like European or very German, let's say, or Germanic paganism as well, just because I'm half German. But yeah, it's mainly like the traditional kind of what you hear and learn about Wicca, high priestess kind of workings, let's say, in a way as well, and honoring the spirits and the elemental kind of energies, and as I said, the god and the goddess.
Right. Have you been initiated, or was it some kind of like self-initiation? I know it's like in different parts of Wicca, they have like different opinions about that.
So that's the thing. I never was in a initiated kind of coven, just because that was never a possibility for me where I've always lived, because I've always moved so much because I'm a military kid. So I did a self-dedication. However, I would definitely be interested in having like a formal initiation, because of course with Gardnerian being like the traditional form, of course, people kind of argue with, are you even a real Wiccan if you haven't been initiated by a coven?
So again, in this video, I want to point out that there's a lot of shop talk. And so there's a lot of lingo here that they're using that an outsider like myself, had I not been exposed to other people of this faith, of this practice, I would not know. I would not know what they're talking about. Luckily, I've been out talking to people and have gotten some light. I mean, still a lot of this stuff, I barely have the functional definitions of it. So another reason why I'm going to be very excited to have some people on who can interact with me or us and explain a little bit more in detail what some of these things mean. But so Wicca as she's talking about Wicca, she's presenting it more as a traditional religion. It makes me think of, again, comparing it to the dichotomous nature of with Christianity. It's like the Catholicism version of it, where you've got the the evangelical free Christians who are just like, we're non-denominational, we love Jesus, that's all we do. Whereas you have the more Catholic, Lutheran, Presbyterian, more traditionalist views of Christianity that are like, there's rituals, there's practices, there's ordinations, there's christenings, right? And so it would seem that Wicca, from my understanding, falls more on the side of a traditionalist belief. And we're going to see a juxtaposition to that here in a moment. She's talking about, again, you heard her reference there, energy, working with energy. Energy is going to take a big play into tonight, and we're going to focus a little bit more on this energy as time goes on, as we kind of dissect what the building blocks are of this belief system.
I personally think, if you're living the Wiccan life, let's say, and you're dedicated to it, then for me it's fine, but yeah.
Yeah, I get that. Okay, nice. So at the moment you're practicing solitary, like without any kind of oven.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay, cool. So Scarlett, can you tell us a bit more about your way of practicing? I know you started out with like being interested in Wicca, but you are now more into a specific path of paganism. Maybe you can tell us a bit more about you.
Yeah, my path has really evolved and changed over the years. I started with Wicca, and I still participate in a lot of kind of Wiccan traditions, especially the traditional 8 Sabbats, as well as the Espats. I love celebrating the holidays. That's a big part of my channel.
And again, we're not going to really get an explanation on the 8 Sabbats or those holidays here tonight.
About Wicca, and I also work with the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine and things like that, and incorporate witchcraft and certain witchcraft practices that tend to be more Wicca based. But in general, I kind of just shifted more towards paganism, in part because I'm kind of a history buff, and I really love looking at ancient cultures and ancient civilizations and what their religious practices were, and trying to find some wisdom in this ancient history and kind of bring that into my personal spiritual practice. So I love learning about different traditions in, ancient Greece and Rome, but also in kind of Norse paganism or Celtic paganism. So that's something I've been really focused on over the past few years, is learning about these different cultures and seeing what pieces of them we can bring into our modern day practices.
So you kind of have that in common, because I think, Ella, you studied social anthropology, no?
Yes.
So that's kind
Social
of
and cultural.
also.
Yeah.
That's really nice, lovely. Yeah, that's also a very big part for me, my practice, to just like look into the history and the roots of things. I think that we can learn a lot from that. And
I just want to highlight a comment from Kai Wrights. They say, little delayed to the context now, but it's the Maiden, the Mother, and the Crone. Those are the 3 expressions of the goddess. Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, again. And she says, usually Hecate is also represented in this way. So we'll get a little bit more. We won't get into all the deities, but we're going to get into the expression of the deities in this video they bring up. Basically, what does it mean when they say Norse and these other these older religions? And so I also want to highlight that you see these 3 women here, they're going to espouse a love of history. She said social anthropology. You're going to see a love of science from, I believe, the Witch's Cookery main host down in the bottom right-hand corner. So that is something that these people aren't just these, superstitious, crazy out there kind of people. They love science. They love history. So there's an appreciation of anthropology. So we'll get into more of what the reflections of that mean, but I also just want to do a lot to kind of dispel a lot of the myths tonight about witchcraft and Wicca and paganism that they're just these crazy people out there, drinking blood and slaughtering goats, So that's not what we're seeing here. We're seeing some very reasonable, very intelligent people. So let's keep listening on.
I think it's very valuable as well. You said that you follow like a Celtic and Norse pagan path.
Yeah, mostly. I think so. I'm still kind of figuring it out. And I'm by no means an expert on the Norse path or the Celtic.
That's another thing I want to point out. She says, I'm still figuring it out. That's what I see is quite common when I talk to people on the street or out in the world. Typically, no one really does claim to be an expert on these things. In the philosophical field, I would say that most practitioners that I've talked to, just as we spoke with Sean on Wednesday, and I said he seems like an existentialist. Wow, that's a word. I would say most of the Wiccan pagan witches that I've talked to, I would put them more in the postmodernist camp. And we'll have time. Tomorrow we're going to get into some philosophy, but we'll have time to unpack more of these philosophies and see if I'm even right. But postmodernism is more of things mean what you want them to mean. It's the meaning is imbued, not discovered. And so we'll see if I have that right or not as time goes on, but let's continue to listen on.
Celtic path. But yeah, I'm gravitating more towards those traditions. And there is kind of even some overlap between them. Yeah. So I focus on those, but for my YouTube channel, I also explore other cultures as well, because I know there's so many different forms of paganism and different types of paganism that people are interested in. So I also, learn and chat about other forms as well.
Okay, thank you for this little introduction of.
And we're going to get more into the different expressions of deities here in a moment, as I keep saying. But I just want to highlight right now that we've got the Wiccan, who works primarily with the goddess. And she mentioned lightly some other spirits. But then you have the pagan, who is talking about a wide variety of beliefs and faiths and historical religions. So right then and there, you can kind of see the difference is that, and this is kind of what I've seen as well leading up to this, is that Wicca seems to be people who work primarily with the goddess, whereas or the god, specifically the goddess, but sometimes the god. And pagan seems to be people who have all sorts of gods and goddesses that they go to, turn to, believe in, worship. Right. Now, I think even we'll see here in a moment. Well, I'll save for when we get into it, but you're going to see that they too believe in the goddess or god, this kind of prime deity. Let's listen on.
Yourselves and your path, basically. So, I mean, you both said that you are working with deities, the goddess, the god, or pagan deities. For that matter, let's start with Ella again. Can you tell us more about how in your Wiccan practice you do that? Do you only refer to them as goddess and god, or do you assign specific names? Do you also work with different deities? How does that work?
Mm-hmm. So growing up, I always kind of referred more to the goddess, and I just, never had one specific one. Like right now, for example, I see a lot of people work with Hecate. Hecate. Yeah. I always mess up on the English pronunciation on that one.
Same.
But, me too.
For example, I personally, to this day, always just refer to the goddess, and I see her mostly in the triple form, which is quite common for Wiccans. But she's also quite prevalent in like a lot of the pagan, European pagan forms with, the Maiden, Mother, Crone, and then you have like that, triple goddess element that's in many countries in a way. And then the male deity, I've only, as I said earlier, mentioned only kind of recently started working more with the more masculine side of things. So I think I tend more to Wodan, which, is like the, kind of like Thor, and not Thor, Odin. Sorry. And so I'm kind of exploring that. So I'm still really new with the more masculine deity aspect. So, and even with, the feminine one, I definitely did only really work with the goddess. So I never really started working with specific ones, like how many other people like to incorporate very specific ones from, Greek or Egyptian mythology and things like that. For me, it's always just been the goddess. So that's really what I focus on most.
Okay, and how about you, Scarlett?
Yeah, I do work with different deities. Sometimes that depends on the time of year. For example, if I'm celebrating a particular holiday like Yule, I might work more with Odin, who is a deity who is more associated with Yule. Or for like Ostara coming up, it would be Ostar. Or there's different pronunciations on her name too. So sometimes it depends on which holiday I'm celebrating, or if there's a particular god or goddess I'm feeling really connected to at the moment. But I kind of view the gods and goddesses as more archetypal, like manifestations of the divine feminine or the divine masculine.
So she's about to get into something else, but what I want to highlight, something she was just talking about, is something that I've seen when speaking to someone who is a Wiccan, a witch, a pagan. The deities that deities that they turn to seem to be a really personal expression of the person. And so if you know a little bit about mythology or histories, world religions is kind of I've been brought up in, you can learn a lot about someone by someone in this faith by asking them who their deity is. A lot of times they're personally chosen. It seems to be they choose their deity. The deity doesn't choose them. And again, I'm limited in my perspective here, but that's just what I've seen. I could be wrong. Some people could say, well, I felt chosen by my deity, or he talked to me in a shining sunbeam. I don't know. I just haven't seen that. What I've seen is that mostly the practitioners of this belief, they pick their deity, and there's some sort of personal connection. And so it can be very personal to ask them who their deity is. But what I can see is a lot of times they're excited to talk about their deity and how they connect with them. It's funny because sometimes I'll talk to them and they'll talk about their deity, and I don't even have to ask. They'll just bring it up, and it makes a lot of sense. You see a person, the way they're dressed, the way they express themselves, and then they'll say, "This is my person," and I'm like, "Yeah, that could have, you could have given me multiple choice, and I might have picked it." Again, it just goes back to the the personal side of this belief of this belief system. It seems very personal, very intimate for people who are in this belief system, and they seem very passionate. And most people that I talk to, they're excited to talk about this. They're excited to share, and they're excited to get into it. And that's really cool because it makes talks about spirituality and faith very easy as long as you're going to be respectful. I've seen people not be respectful, and because it's so personal to them, if you're coming from a different belief system and you are judgmental, you're shutting them down. Well, it's a double-edged sword. They're so personal. They're so personal and so passionate about their belief system, their deities, their spells, that they're excited to talk about it. But if you spit on that, if you step on that, if you stomp on that, it's gonna shut down that conversation real quick, and they're not gonna want anything to do with you. Now, luckily, I haven't learned that personally. I've been blessed with a very open mind to talk to people and have these wonderful conversations, but I've seen a lot of people make this mistake, and I've heard talks with other Wiccans, pagans, witches, feeling very unaccepted by other belief systems at times. So for those of us out there that are part of a different belief system, know that that's one of the primary ways that you can shut down conversation. Which is what we don't want at the Soul Word, right? We want to open up conversation. So don't be closed-minded. Don't be judgmental. Don't harsh their vibe, so to speak. Now they're going to get into the expression of the prime deity or deities, the duality, and how they're expressed in the plurality. So let's listen in.
So even though, I might be interacting with them in different, pantheons or different expressions of the divine masculine and feminine, I kind of feel like they're still kind of connected to this more maybe universal spirit and their avenues of connecting with it. So yeah, you know, I definitely work with different deities depending on the time of year. If there's something I'm working on trying to achieve, so like bringing in a little witchcraft, I might ask for a blessing from a certain deity that might be associated with, you know, what I'm trying to achieve for the spell. So it really does, you know, vary a lot. But in general, I kind of just view the deities as these kind of sacred archetypes.
Perfect. That already kind of ties into my next question here, because obviously as a secular witch, I'm not an atheist witch. I'm more of an agnostic witch, I would say. But it also means that I don't really work with deities or don't, really involve that aspect into my witchcraft. So it would be really
So again, she's about to go into the direction that I've been really excited to get to, which is the prime deity. But let's talk about this atheist witch, right? Atheist, like kind of agnostic is what she refers to herself later. Agnostic witch. She doesn't work with the deities. She doesn't involve them. She works with energy. And so that's a prelude to this energy question we're going to talk about in a little bit. Tom says, sounds like the spirit within is trying to connect to the physical world. And yeah, that can be an interesting look at it. You know, I think that they would flip it and say that the spirit without is connecting to the spirit within. The spirit of the physical world is trying to get in touch with the spirit inside. But I do think that there is a give and take there, right? Like their spirit opens up to the other spirit that's out there. And again, this is something that's right there within the very Bible that Christians preach and teach from. Christianity is a spiritual religion. It's very spiritual, and so this is very much our sister belief when it comes to the doctrine of Christianity. They're walking a same path in spirituality. Now, there's going to be a difference in expression, and we'll get to that here in a moment. But let's listen a little bit more into this prime deity.
interested to know in how you see the goddess. Like, is it like a manifestation or an archetype for some desire? Is it like a prevalent energy in the universe that is there? Is it like a creator? What does mean God or goddess for you?
So I have to agree a lot here with Scarlett. I also definitely see them more as manifestations of like an energy that you can kind of perceive, for example. That's also kind of why, for me, in the end of the day, all that energy sums up to be one big energy. And I mean, we can see that obviously with, especially, you know, in certain regions where they have very similar kind of deities, but with different names. But in the end of the day, their energies really resemble each other. And then obviously you have the elemental energies that were, you know, are personified kind of beings. And so for me, it's really more like an energy. I wouldn't necessarily see it as like, you know, an actual solid kind of being living in clouds, sort of, you know. I don't think that's what I would necessarily, I'm not sure, I've never really met anyone that's kind of had those views. So for me, it's more energy, and like all kind of go into one. So even though we have like these different specters of, like, for example, we have Aphrodite, and then, you know, in like Greek, or we have, you know, Thor in the Norse, or, you know, all these like Celtic ones, to me, they all are like tiny little fragments of one bigger element or one bigger thing. And those are like characteristics of that one bigger thing. So I'm not sure where I've read that. I know it was in some book that I read it, where they kind of compared it to a diamond with the facets.
Oh, that's really nice.
I'm not sure. It was one of those older books that I read a while ago. So I really can't quote who it exactly was. But yeah, where it's kind of explaining that it's one big diamond, and then every deity is one different facet. So if you are, you know, wanting to work with love, for example, usually people work with like Aphrodite or like Venus and things like that, or, you know, Freyr. Obviously it depends, but yeah, I guess you get the like idea what I'm trying to explain here. And yeah, that's to me personally. I think there's a lot more to it, and you could like definitely go on and on with this topic. But just to keep it somewhat short.
Oh, I really actually like the diamond analogy. I think that's a really powerful picture and something to think about. Well, Scarlett, you already started to kind of like answer that question. Do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I definitely love the diamond analogy there. And yeah, I kind of think of it as if you take a topic like love, like you were mentioning, it's a force that's both eternal and it's more powerful than us. You know, love has existed before us and it will exist after us, and so it has kind of that immortality. And at the same time, it is so much greater than us, you know, as physical beings. So I think there are certain things like that in the world, and every culture has kind of created a deity to represent these extremely powerful forces. That's why you have, you know, like Venus and Aphrodite and like Freya and like all of these love goddesses in almost every culture.
I think one interesting thing I'd like to know, she says, is physical beings. And a question I would have, maybe I'll have to ask some of my, Wiccan friends and pagan friends, is she said, as physical beings. And so just keeping my my mind open to that, they're going to talk about everything's energy. But then here she says, as physical beings. Now, I assume she might mean what I would mean. And that is that, within the tenets of Christianity, we would say that the Judeo-Christian belief would say that we're spiritual beings in physical bodies. So we are spirit, and we worship God in spirit as God is spirit, but we have physical bodies. And one day, the Christian belief, or the specifically Christian belief, is that there will be a union between spirit and physical, and will exist primarily as physically spirit beings. We won't have to get into the glorified state tonight, but ultimately, my side of the spectrum would say we're not physical beings. We're spiritual beings with physical bodies. So I'm curious, when she says as physical beings, if she's making a distinction between spirit and physicality. According to her belief, is she a physical being without a spirit? And does she interact with spirits? I would think not. I would assume, and from some of the other practices that are wrapped up in these practices, is that she would probably say the same. She's a spiritual being in a physical body. But interesting thing. Oh, I never want to assume what someone means, so that's why I'm excited to get a live interview from time to time.
And then on the other side, you have war. Like war is also eternal and powerful. And so there are countless deities associated with war. So I think there are these kind of energies or forces in the universe that are so powerful that every culture, has kind of come up with their own version of trying to understand and connect with it, even though it's so much greater and bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, it kind of really reflects the overlying kind of issues in the different societies around the world. I think that's very true, and you can really see what keeps people's minds busy in the personifications of, or like the god and goddesses they have. That's very true. Yeah. So when it comes to witchcraft and especially spells, do you do a lot of spells or ritual in your practices? And also, how do you?
So this will be the last section that we cover tonight. We're not going to go into the full video again, but here they're about to get into spells, and here is where the energy conversation comes back in. And so they just explained that their personal take on the goddess or gods would be energy. It's an energy that pre-exists us and will post-exist us. It's higher and more powerful and eternal. And so love, war, right? And so I think they were also saying that love and war are just minor refractions of the main source of energy, which would be the goddess/gods. And I'm curious if the goddess is a triune being, so three separate beings, the Maiden, the Mother, and the Crone. I don't think so. I think it's a one being in three aspects, right? The goddess as reflected in the Maiden, the goddess is reflected in the Mother, and the goddess is reflected in the Crone. Not to be confused with the Christian Trinity, which is three separate beings in perfect unison with one another, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Those are three completely different beings, and they're also completely the same being. I think this is primarily the goddess is just three hats that she wears. But I'm curious to know, at the top, is there a duality, right? So if you say God, so in the same nature, the goddess, as shown with the three different hats, the three different aspects, the masculine versus the feminine, is the masculine the same being reflected in a masculine form, or is it a separate masculine being? So Kai is giving us a little bit of some inside scoop here. So she's called 3-in-1, so she's represented as one person with three faces, right? And so it makes me, for comic book fans out there, it makes me think of the Living Tribunal from Marvel Comics, but it's a golem being with three heads. I don't know if that's a perfect representation of Wicca, but the idea here is, it's not three separate beings. It's one person with, three different faces. So I think there's a distinction there. So now let's get into the energy, and they're going to kind of explain what they do with this energy.
I think a spell works. Like, if you would have to explain, how does a spell actually work?
For me, a spell or a ritual is definitely a more bigger sort of thing with energy-wise. So whilst obviously I have my coffee with intention and things like that, for me, a real spell is properly sitting down and having like the ingredients that I need and actually creating like this little thing, this little bundle of energy basically, and sending that out. Now, with me, it really depends on the time of year as well as how busy I am during that time of year. So sometimes I'm more active with spell work and rituals, and sometimes I haven't done spells in like weeks to months on end just because of like things that are going on. But when I do, for example, protection, I think I always try and have protection going on, even if it is as simple as like drawing some sigils or runes. Then for me, I think energy, I really like the entire vibration of the universe, and I like to tie back to more scientific ways of like, because I really need to explain why things work, and if I can't explain it, then I'm like, no. So for me, I explain spells in particular as kind of wavelength and sort of accumulating different energy, knowing that certain things have vibration and have energy that they kind of contain within them, and then bringing them all together to create this very powerful little bundle of energy, and then releasing that. And I always envision it like a drop in a very still pond of water where it starts rippling, and then it'll with time have effect and reach the destination that it's supposed to, hopefully, or at least have some sort of desired impact.
Now, she also noticed she mentioned intentionality. Now, most of the practitioners that I've spoken to, if not all of the practitioners I've spoken to who we've crossed this topic, intentionality is important. You can't accidentally work a spell. It's interesting if you watch, common media or something, you'll see like a wizard or a witch accidentally playing with something they don't understand and creating some sort of mishap, right, for probably narrative purposes. It seems to be that core to working a spell in this practice is intentionality. You have to do things with the right intention. Sometimes they'll put a little bit of flair into the ritual where there's a little bit more like ceremony. And I've heard some people say the ceremony is not really necessary by the ceremony itself. It's about creating an aura, creating an environment of intentionality, more than the actual, so intention more than actual ritual. So anyways, let's just keep going on though.
And so that's kind of really what I like to work with my spell work. I always have very, color correspondence and like these, correspondences basically for very specific things. And to then also not only on top of having all of those ingredients, but afterwards also taking like the needed steps. I think that's something that we have as a community started to talk more about recently is, you can't just expect things to work if you're sitting on the sofa and not actually taking like the steps to it as well, because to me spells also are door openers, and sometimes also simply a reminder or the act of it itself is some kind of manifesting reminder that you're more likely to actually take notice of opportunities that will then lead you to your desired outcome. And to a certain degree, I also really believe that magic is the placebo effect. So I really find it very, very, just to me, it's magic that we can take a sugar pill and still have at least somewhat there's the same kind of effect.
This is getting into a little bit of the postmodernism that I was talking about. Postmodernism being more of you imbue something with meaning, or your meaning gives things power, right? Postmodern would say that the story has power. So here she's talking about a spell is placebo, and the pagan who's about to speak here in a second, she's going to echo that as well. What is a spell? Well, it's mostly just placebo, but let's let her explain that.
As taking normal pills. And for me, that just kind of speaks on terms of mind over matter and how much we can actually impact. So that's kind of what I also see spells as. And I always see people say, but how do you know it was a spell and not just something else? Maybe it was just a placebo. Maybe you just kind of made it up in your mind. And to me, in the end of the day, if I got the result that I desired, then I don't care where it came from, obviously it's an affirmation to me always personally, and I will always in my mind say, that was my spell work, or that was me manifesting it. But if someone says, oh, that was just a placebo effect, then I'm like, yeah, probably.
I very much share this, like especially in the agnostic witchcraft and atheist witchcraft community. This is basically how we explain spells. It's always the placebo effect, and I think it's super powerful. I'm fascinated by it, and how I understood you now, it's that you basically believe obviously in that part, but you also believe in like an accumulation of inner and outer energies. Scarlett, but how do you do spell work?
Yeah, so I pretty much agree with both of you in terms of why it works, combination of placebo and energy. And I do think that science-wise is starting to learn a lot more about this kind of stuff. There was a really fascinating book I read not too long ago called Real Magic, and it was taking a laboratory scientific approach to basically things like spells.
Oh, nice.
And measuring the results. And it's super fascinating for anyone who's like really into the scientific reasoning behind why spells work. In terms of the types of spells, I really like chaos magic. So like making sigils for spells, I do that a lot.
Again, here comes a little bit of shop
really
talk.
Easy. You don't really need
sigils, chaos magic. These things like are things that outsiders wouldn't necessarily understand.
Different ways to kind of activate the sigil. You can like burn it as like a really easy way.
So it'd be good to have someone on where I can ask them, what do you mean by that? Can you explain that to me a little bit more? Can you give us a little bit more understanding?
Different intentions or even different deities. So I'll sometimes like place certain tarot cards in different places in my apartment as kind of tiny little spells. So I have the King of Pentacles as my lock screen on my phone. So it's always like making me go back to work, like reminding me to like get back to it.
Nice.
And then I will put different tarot cards on the fridge sometimes to like remind me to be healthy, or like I'll put the High Priestess under my pillow.
I love that.
So I do these like little things like that. It's just super. I don't even know if you would call those spells. They're just mild little things that impart a little bit of energy into certain areas of my life. So yeah, I do a lot of chaos magic. I do a lot of tarot spells, and then Occasionally, like yourself, I like kitchen witchery. So sometimes I'll like choose certain herbs based on their correspondence for a meal that I'm cooking, or do a little incantation while I'm stirring, little things like that.
Oh, lovely. I really love that tarot magic thing. I think I have to try that out. That's actually ingenious, especially to like, it's just a little reminder for your brain to keep striving towards your goals, or I think that's really genius. Yeah, I mean, for me it's very similar. I mean, I do believe in a placebo. I don't necessarily myself believe in certain energies that, well, I wouldn't say I don't believe in it. I just am a very analytical science kind of person, psychologist, but like very deep within. So that's my belief, and I like to question everything. So how I do spell work is mainly based around herbalism, about psychological techniques, which obviously find a lot of use in spells as well. And I also believe in the power. I mean, I'm very much a cottage and kitchen witch and do like everyday simple witchcraft, but I also feel like the more time and energy you put into a spell, like searching for certain ingredients, for correspondences, for color correspondences, even if I don't believe they hold any kind of energy, I still believe that just the time you put into that, for me personally, helps you manifest it, or helps you concentrate on the outcome even more. So that's how I work with it in comparison to you guys. Oh yeah, I wanted to ask you about.
So there, as she is talking about kind of the secular witchcraft, and she's there, you still see the verbiage of intentionality and energy, imbuing this energy into things. The but she talks about being a scientist and being more interested in the science aspect of it. So she's looking at herbs that are, actually have certain scientific properties to them, whereas the pagan, she said she would pick herbs based on their ritualistic significance, or maybe occultic significance, or I'm struggling to think of better words here, but basically the intention or emotions, or again, I'm for a loss of words at a good word for it. But so one's a little bit like, oh, this herb is associated with this belief or deity, I'll throw it in there. Where she's coming from, this herb has these certain scientific properties. The word, from the Christian perspective, the word sorcery comes from its roots pharmakia, where we get, like pharmaceuticals, pharmacy, and specifically where the Christian doctrine would forbid is things that alter the mind, right? You can see in Christian tenets, don't get drunk. It's about avoiding being drawn into a stupor or into an altered state of being or mind. So she's not saying that she's throwing shrooms, or opioids into her, food. She's referencing pharmaceutical properties, in which case she'd be very close to a pharmacist, right? A naturopath. But especially if you imagine feudal ages and going back onwards, before you had pharmacy schools, and a proper look at pharmacy. I think we could probably thank a lot of the modern day pharmacy approaches to some of this tampering around and learning these properties. But what's the difference then between a pharmacist and a witch like her in witchcraft is that energy and intentionality, right? She even on the most secular side, she says imbuing this energy. And so Jen writes, and she's talking about the quote, "That is why these deities have been created, to express all these energies." And she's bringing that up. And so, to understand these energies, this energy. And so that's important to note, that energy seems to be core to this belief system. Now, I think we're at the end of where we're going to go with this. Let me listen to the next question.
About your daily practice or your monthly practice, however you live your spirituality. Ella, you already said that with Wicca it's more like ceremonial magic and more ritual, and it's all tends to be a little bit bigger. And Scarlett, you just said with the tarot magic, it's sometimes also just these little quick things. Like on a regular basis, how would you say you practice your craft the most? Is it
So here they're going to get into the practicality of the day-to-day witchcraft, and that is something that we're going to return back to as I talk to people in interviews. But for the sake of tonight, what I want to look at is just a little debrief of kind of what we've learned today. So again, just to shout out this channel, because I believe in giving credit where credit's due, tonight would not have been possible without the Witch's Cookery and her having these wonderful guests on to speak about their beliefs and be open with us. That being said, when I look at, when we look at witchcraft and this, I can't help but try and compare it to my own views. And I think in many ways we can, I might be able to classify myself as a Wiccan, a witch, or a pagan, right? Now they might disagree with me on that, but I would, but core to the belief system is they believe in a plurality of deities. And they say that these deities aren't really like the all-powerful creator deities. They're powerful spiritual energies. And again, that's what we see in the Bible, in Christian doctrine. We see the Prince of Persia, the Prince of Greece, the Elohim from the Witch of Endor. We see, Legion, this guy possessed with a bunch of spirits that give him power. So I would say, yeah, that fits pretty well within my belief system. And they say, well, we believe in one ultimate deity, and this is where I would be more pagan than Wiccan, and that is that I believe in a primary deity in a masculine form, not a feminine form, and so that's where I would differ with them, and so I think it's important to contextualize these things, because the first thing that you want to do when approaching a new worldview or belief or philosophy, you want to understand it. If you understand it, you can compare it to your own, and instead of just saying that's different, that's not me, I have nothing to do with that, it's important that you can actually identify where there is overlap, right? Even on the Christian side of things, this is what missionaries do with anthropology. This is what they do with what's known as contextualization. They'll go in, they'll learn the heart language of a people. They'll learn the names for the various gods and goddesses. And there's a very interesting book called Spirit of the Rainforest, which deals with a lot of these spiritualities, and it's given from the standpoint of a shaman. The whole book is written as a written testimony of a shaman of the Yamamoto tribe in the rainforest, and he talks about spirits and deities and Yaipada, which is the name for their prime deity. And I don't believe they said Yaipada they might have referred to him as a masculine, I think, in their culture. But anyways, it's interesting just to see how we can look at this belief and understand it, because that's at the end of the day what we want to do. We want to further understanding. We want to seek to understand. We don't want to shut down conversation. We don't want to shut down belief systems. So at the Soul Ward, we want to give every worldview a platform where it can express itself. We can hear it, we can listen to it, we can understand it. Now, you don't have to, I don't expect, let's say we taught on Wicca today. I don't expect everyone to be like, I'm a Wiccan now. I don't expect to, have a Mormon on and everyone be like, I'm a Mormon now. And everyone have a Satanist on. Everyone's like, I'm a Satanist now, right? That's not what we're trying to do. So you might hear these things and they might challenge you, and sometimes even frustrate you, but that's okay. Be challenged, be frustrated, wrestle with this new knowledge, take it in, chew on it, meditate on it, and see what it does to your own belief systems. This is something where, a lot of people might say this is the enemy of Christianity. And as you can see in the Old Testament in the New Testament, a lot of the enemies of the church were pagans. They're pagan practitioners working magic and sorcery and all these things. When you look at missionary work, a lot of times when missionaries come in, their primary opponents are witch doctors and shamans and these kind of people. So you might say, oh, this is clearly an enemy. But if you get caught up in that, if you get caught up in this is the enemy of my belief or this is not my belief, you're not seeking to understand, and you're not understanding where other people are coming from, and you're building a wall between you and them. And so what we want to do is we want to break down walls. We want to break down every chain that would bind us from getting to know one another, and be able to open dialogue, open conversations with one another. So if I were to contextualize paganism as, I think, more on the side where I could have an easier in with my own beliefs, I would say between these three, I think I would identify more pagan than any of this. I believe in a masculine God. I believe in the deity known as Jesus, and I believe that he showed himself to be the primary deity. And so he gave us a really good look at how I can connect with my energy. And so the energy that I see they believe that all energy, we're seeing all energy comes from the primary God, right? The goddess or the god in masculine or feminine form. So I would say that, yeah, I would agree. The energy for me comes from my masculine god and flows down through me. Now, where we see a difference is, I would say, the way that I tap into that energy, right? So as Jen was saying, the God, so why deny the creator of the universe, Jehovah God, who made the energy they are so fascinated with? Well, that's the thing is, I don't think they would deny the creator of the energy. I think that they would disagree on who that energy is. They would say it's the goddess. Jen would say it's Jehovah, right? So either way, there's a difference there, but they're agreeing on there is an energy. Christianity would say that energy comes from God. And how do you access that energy? You commune with the Godhead. You commune with that primary God. Whereas it would seem, and I really want to have more conversations to understand more, is in Wicca, paganism, and witchcraft, they would say the way that you connect with that energy is to reach out to various sources of energy, whether that's through your own intentionality or some sort of deity or expression of the deity, whether it be love or war or Wodan, Odin, Aphrodite, and tap into that energy. And so that's where I think that this really differs from my own personal beliefs, is how do we access that energy? But it's very fascinating. And I'd really like to see how, to add a third wheel here, I'd love to bring in some Eastern religion for Taoism and see how that kind of energy plays into this. A lot of some of the posters and just what I see out in these astrology stores, I also see the same kind of thing in Qigong and talking about chakra and that kind of stuff. So I'd be very interested to sit down with three people, have someone from more of a Western Judeo-Christian context, have someone from more of a pagan Wicca witchcraft context, and have someone sit from an Eastern philosophy, Eastern religion context, and get them all to intermingle. I think that'd be very interesting. That being said, I want to turn over to some live chat and some questions. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out for our recorded part of tonight. And again, you can find this on YouTube. Ask you guys out there, consider joining our Discord. And what I'd like to do is actually, as our Discord gets a little bigger and we get some more perspectives in there, host a few studies where we can have some roundtable discussions, some live chats, maybe even get some voices in on here for some of the streams. And I'm really still kind of evolving and developing that. But please also consider supporting the Soul Ward. You can find us at soulward.org under the Support Us tab. There's various ways you can get involved there. I'm going to close out the recorded portion of this, and then we'll get into some live chat questions. So chat, I'll be right back.